Good morning, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. All right, we got two people watching with two thumbs up. Thank you very much for hitting that thumbs up when you come into the live stream. By hitting that thumbs up button, we'll get more people to join in because the algorithm will pick up this video and encourage more people to watch it. So that's always more fun when we have people hitting that thumbs up button and having them join in on the comment section. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the credible threat theory and how it applies to the inflationary scenario that we are now expecting coming into the future. And you can see this being deployed through the mainstream media. I left a link down in the description for you guys. It's just a generic article. I don't even remember what publication it's coming from or whoever it was written by, but it doesn't matter. All the articles are somewhat similar to the same thing, is that the Fed may need to stop the interest rate cuts and go stagnant with them for a while, or even raise in a lot of theories out there. And this is all based off of the idea that there could be an inflationary scenario due to inflationary pressures or due to supply chain pressures that would then cause the inflationary scenario that we would be looking for, or that the Federal Reserve would be assuming we would be looking at going into the future economy. That's a better way of saying it. So to understand the credible threat theory, this is one that I have taken back a long time. See, like most people's theory when it comes to understanding the Federal Reserve is that they screwed up. And this is a difficult one for me to absorb and then think, how do I use that information that they screwed up? And here's all the ways that they did screw up. And then how do I use that information to better position myself, considering that if they have screwed up, then that means things are going to fall apart, or that it's not going to work, or that the system is no longer going to function. And to me, that's like a wait and see kind of approach that says, hey, let's position ourselves into gold, let's position ourselves into Bitcoin, and then watch the Federal Reserve crash and burn. So this is one way of looking at it. And to me, like, it's not too far off of a concept to go ahead and take that sort of position, but to take a full stance into that, believing that that is the way that it's going to go down. I don't necessarily believe that to be the case, since we seem to be continuing on and on and on, right? So how are you going to position yourself with the idea that the system does continue to go on and on, right? Now, you can take the insurance policy, right? Get into gold, get into silver, get into Bitcoin, things that are out of that third-party claim, which is a really good position to be in with those precious metals and digital currencies, especially those that are outside of the ability for somebody to just come and take from you, unless they're literally going to come kicking through the door or something of that nature. So there is ways to get away from that third-party claim, but for the most part, most of us are going to have some sort of experience in which that we have to deal with the third party, which basically means if you're going to have a mortgage or if you're going to own land, you're still going to be reliant on the financial system, or at least government's ability to have some sort of property rights. And all that is all going to come down to the ability to trust what it is that's going on inside of your environment, which is the confidence that is being portrayed out there. So all that being said, we got a bunch of people up in here. Thank you very much for joining in on today's live stream. 70 people right now with 11 likes. Go hit that like button. We'll get more people to join in on this one. This is good, because understanding the credible threat theory, we're 3 minutes into it. Okay, let's get busy. So to understand the credible threat theory, which is, again, one that takes it back 20 years or even more than 20 years now, and to understand where it came from and then how it was being deployed, built, like executed in all fashions throughout the financial crisis, through COVID, and then even into today, which I see happening to run rampant with this idea that the Federal Reserve is going to back off on their rate cuts, or, maybe stall out, or even in some cases raise them. And then to understand how this credible threat theory plays into how the monetary policy is actually being conducted. Because what we think is coming into the future will then change our behaviors. We will feel differently about our purchases, the choices that we make, the businesses that we start, the places that we invest. And if they can manipulate that belief of what it is that's taking place into the future, then they can really guide the markets into what it is that they need for their monetary policy. Okay, so let's think about this for just a little bit, because again, if you're new to this channel and you've never experienced the credible threat theory or understand how it works, it's a little complicated, and so I'm going to try and briefly talk about how it works very fastly so you can understand how this is being deployed today, because there's a very big, what I feel, a very big credible threat coming when it's the idea of tariffs and inflationary scenarios, and then what it is that the Federal Reserve truly wants for their monetary policy. So, credible threat theory works off of the idea that their words are the monetary policy tool. And the way that it works is through the idea, and this is like a hypothetical story being told of a guy who invents a gold machine. And with this gold machine, he can produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy. The moment this information gets out there to the public, the price of gold would plummet. And being if the gold market was any kind of efficiency, the market would say, hey, this guy can produce as much gold as he wants. The price would probably most likely fall pretty dramatically. Even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold or even has the machine to do it. Just the credible threat alone is enough to start manipulating the markets in a direction in which that the mainstream media attention would give it, right? So just being a credible threat going out there that this guy could invent this gold machine and drop the price of gold is the way that they use this tool. Now, I've shown examples of this many times throughout, the years of this channel as I've developed this theory. But right now, I feel it's really being deployed because think about some of the things that the Federal Reserve has talked about trying to do with their Fed funds rate. Now, if you're not familiar with the whole Fed funds rate and how this is being changed, this is a complicated story all on its own. But to understand, like the Fed funds is like the base rate in which that they try to get all rates to move. So if they are lowering the Fed funds rate, that is their attempt to try and stimulate the economy by getting other rates to come down so that people would go out there and buy houses and cars and go on vacation, start businesses and hiring people and doing all the stuff that people do with low interest rates. It comes down to the Fed funds, and if they can get this like interest rate level on the overnight banking lending system to come down, they can then start moving into the broader economy. Okay, I don't want to get too much into that. So to understand that the Fed funds rate is the interest rate in which that they use to try and manipulate the monetary policy out there, it's to understand that when they lower rates, they stimulate the economy. When they raise rates, they restrict the economy. But it's not just the raising and lowering of interest rates, right? Because if they lower rates right now, people have this belief or idea that that is somewhat stimulating to the economy. But that's not exactly entirely true because they have to achieve what they refer to as the neutral interest rate. And this is really where I think the credible threat is now being deployed into the mainstream media and then into the market's attention, especially through the idea of tariffs and the threat of tariffs. So now think about this. The Federal Reserve wants to bring the Fed funds rates down to neutral, but the neutral level is not set in stone. It can move. And it moves off of inflation expectations. So now if the Federal Reserve has ammunition, that is the Fed funds rate, and the ability to lower rates, which is the ammunition, the more they eat away at lowering rates, the more they deploy their ammunition, and that will be a less effective tool for stimulating the economy if we were to happen to go into a recession. So did you guys kind of get that part? Like, it's like almost having like a stockpile of ammunition. They're going bam, 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 firing off, and then you realize, oh man, maybe I should have waited for something bad to happen before I fired off all those guns, right? Before I fired off all those weapons or ammunition. I've drank a lot of coffee, guys. All right. So again, the Federal Reserve is looking to use that neutral interest rate to be like the position of the Fed funds rate, where they're neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. They are just, boom, neutral, right? Since the neutral interest rate can move off of inflation expectation, and firing off rate cuts is basically shooting bullets into the air, they can deploy the idea that there is going to be a credible threat of inflation coming, which would raise the inflation expectations. Right? If you raise the inflation expectations, remember, nothing's happened yet. Nothing's changed. There's no difference between yesterday, the day before, last week, or any of that stuff. There's no real changes that have taken place. The credible threat of the future administration, who is not yet even president, has brought in so many changes to the beliefs of what people are believing is coming to the future, and they are now conducting themselves in a different way that is creating the inflationary scenario that they are looking for. So this deployment of information out there about what it is that the future administration is going to do, the credible threat of it, because they haven't done anything, right? It's just like the gold machine, just the credible threat of being able to do it is enough to change the market's perception. And this is what we are experiencing right now. And so when I think about what it is that the Federal Reserve is attempting to do, which is get closer to the neutral interest rate, and the neutral interest rate will rise off of an inflation expectation that is elevated, and you have a future administration that is throwing credible threats of future inflationary pressures coming from tariffs, then here you have the neutral interest rate that is most likely going to end up rising closer, ever closer to the Fed funds rate, and the Federal Reserve can sit in a position and say, hey man, we got this inflation expectation coming, we can't really move our rates down because that would cause even more inflation, and the neutral interest rate is getting ever closer to the Fed funds rate, and they would achieve their goal. You see how this is being deployed? This is how the Federal Reserve truly operates. I mean, I have taken, and it's not like me just making this stuff up. Like, I got this information directly from the Federal Reserve on how it is that they do this. Like, right down to the communication style. There's an excellent speech that talks all about how it is that they use the mainstream media, how they deploy it into different directions, because they know that if they just throw information out there on like CNBC, they're certainly not going to get the attention of the people who don't pay attention to the economy. So they deliver information through the different channels of attraction out there, knowing that there's groups of people out there who would typically not go out there and view information like this, but if they can deploy this information in through the mainstream media, social media stuff that's out there. Like, I don't know how quite else to explain it, but you know, when they're discussing deep matters of inflation on The View, which is not something that I believe that they would typically talk about unless it was being so dramatically deployed out there for everybody to pay attention to. And this is where I guess I'm getting at as far as how they use this communication style. And knowing and seeing it, every time I fire up the mainstream media and I start scrolling through headlines to see what it is that they're trying to deploy for information, it gets pretty obvious to me that there's some things that they just don't talk about and other things that they dramatically influence. You know, it's getting to the point now as I follow the expectations of the markets and the people out there, it's becoming ever more evident to me that there is a definite use of credible threats going into the future. The more I see that the idea that the Fed was going to keep interest rates extra high, extra long for an extended period of time seems to continue to play out. Now, you can give it any reason you want, but the fact that it is still happening is part of the idea and strategy coming from the Federal Reserve that they had talked about many times in the past, but don't seem to really iterate out there into the mainstream media. But instead, you get mass talks about possible future inflationary scenarios coming from tariffs that don't even yet exist, and creates an inflationary scenario in which the Federal Reserve gets to sit back on their hands and say, hey, look at that, the neutral interest rate is rising on inflation expectations. Didn't we want to be at the neutral interest rate? Isn't that where we wanted to be? Hey, it's like it's getting close. We don't even have to do any work. It's coming to us. Yeah. And that's the way the Federal Reserve is now looking at this system. How many minutes into it? Okay, 15 minutes. I'm trying to keep these videos short for the people out there who don't like listening to 2-hour-long live streams. And to be honest, I love doing these live streams and I love getting this information out. And I love explaining this credible threat theory because I really feel like I am the only one out there who really has locked this into the level that I have. Seeing a lot of people out there who believe in a 2% target as opposed to a 2% average inflation rate over time, which is literally like 99% of the people out there, it really lends to the idea that they have really gaslit the entire markets and mainstream media. And by doing that, that is the ability to control the narrative. And if you can control the narrative, you have the credible threat, right? You have that gold machine and you have the ability to deploy information through this because nobody is really truly understanding what it is that they are up to. Now, I'm not trying to say like I'm so much smarter than everybody else out there. I'm really not. But the thing is that I come down to is that the information that I am putting out there is coming directly from the Federal Reserve itself. Like this is where I'm going to, as far as people say, hey man, where do you get your information? I get it from the Fed. Like straight up the monetary policy, I get it from them. People who are saying that the monetary policy has made a mistake and all this other stuff, then again, you have to take into consideration is like, fine, I have to get out of the system, get into a third part or outside of that third party claim because they have failed. But to me, they have used that same scenario, that expectation that they have screwed up. They use that against the people because now they really don't understand why it is that they screwed up because they believe that they lost control of inflation or they don't know, how to control it or tamp it down or anything like that, which is completely against what it is that they have truly wanted for their monetary policy strategy, which is an elevated inflation expectation. They wanted it. They are using it today. Think about how it is that I am describing the use of this information to raise the inflation expectation, which will then cause the neutral interest rate to rise, which would then get them ever closer to their goal, which is having the Fed funds rate at neutral. I mean, this is being deployed right now. The Federal Reserve is just like, they don't even have to do any, it's like the easiest thing in the world for them to do because they don't have to do anything at all. You know? Except for be credible with the threat. All right, let's get some questions out there. Let's break this thing down. If we need some clarification on things, let's back it up here a little ways. We got 184 people watching. Go hit that like button. If we can get it up to 100 likes here in the next 5-10 minutes, we'll continue on. Otherwise, we'll just end this live stream in a half an hour at the half an hour mark. That way, we'll just make it a short live stream today. All right, like, share, subscribe. Yes, please do. Thank you so much for commenting that. Government, bah humbug. Now, don't. I mean, if you look at it negative all the time, then you have a negative view on all kinds of stuff. So the information that you get from it is negative, and then for the way that you are deploying it is going to be negative. Don't look at it in a negative fashion. Don't give it that meaning. Just say, hey man, this stuff is heavy. It's hard to deal with. And what do I do with that information? I take it and I make the best decisions for myself, even though I don't like what's being said. Like, it's not up to me to decide what it is that's being said. It's up to me to decide what it is I need to do about that. Right? And this is where I think a lot of times people want to associate two different things and say, hey man, how come this and this? And I'm thinking, why did you correlate those two things? Why don't you just take the information in for what it is and then deploy your actions in the most appropriate fashion to what you are wanting from that? People ask me all the time, what does this interest rate adjustment have to mean for gold? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't use gold in that fashion. Gold is an insurance policy to me, and I don't really care about what it does with interest. Like, that doesn't, I don't correlate those two. Those two don't mean anything to me, right? I don't look at it like that. So as other people are like, no, I want to know how I invest in gold. I need to know, and I need to know how these interest rate adjustments are going to affect that, or how it is that I'm going to buy this house, or all these other things. And although there is ways of using chart graphing and correlations and all this other stuff to maybe come up with some indications of where it is that market conditions are going to be going into the future, I mean, I'm not trying to knock that, but there's probably other channels that are really good at, like, deciphering that sort of information. To me, it's more about the direction in which we are headed for the reasons that we are headed that way. And when I think about the credible threat theory that I have developed over these years, it seems to really be evident every time I look at some of the things that are happening out there. One of them being that the Federal Reserve wanted an elevated Fed funds rate and an elevated inflation expectation. Both of those things exist right now. And as people are thinking, man, the Fed's screwed up, and I'm thinking, no, the Fed's got what they, like, somebody says, hey man, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to, earn $100, right? And everybody's like, yeah, okay, whatever. You can't earn $100, right? And then he goes out, walks out, comes back in, and he has $100. How'd you do that? And it was just like, hey, I'm not going to tell you how I did it, right? That's what the Federal Reserve is doing right now. They're not telling people how they did it or why they did it. It's just like they just went out there and did it, and people are like, oh man, look at this crazy scenario that is all taking place right now, and nobody knew that they would react in such fashions. And it was just like, you're right. Nobody can tell exactly how it is that they are going to deploy the tools that they would have in an unusual and exigent circumstance because they don't talk about it. If they told you about it, then you would, if they said, hey man, we are going to step out. If this scenario happens, we are going to do this. If this scenario happens, we are going to do this. Then what would end up happening is if that was communicated out there to the markets, then the people would deploy that information their into their investment strategies as the backup scenario. Like they would price that in, right? They don't talk about that stuff. They like the bank term funding program. You remember that when they just all of a sudden launched that thing when the Silicon Valley Bank started to collapse? That was, again, like one of their monetary policy tools that they somewhat described ahead of time, but then didn't really describe how it is that this thing was going to be used or when it was going to be used. But they did say that they had tools to deploy during market conditions or banking financial conditions in which that there was going to be something of that nature occurring. And now, again, it's just like I can't describe it exactly. I don't have that note in front of me, but to me, like, I mean, because people were asking me at the time, are you worried about keeping your money in the bank? And I actually did a video that was titled something very much of that, like that. It was like, are you worried about keeping your money in the bank? No, but I should be, right? And I wasn't worried about it because I wasn't worried because I knew those safety nets were going to be deployed. I didn't know what kind, I didn't know what they were going to be called, I didn't know how it was going to work, but I just knew that they were there because they talked somewhat about it in their language, right? And so I should have been worried about it because there was going to be banking collapse issues. But I wasn't worried about it because I knew they knew about it. And so that was like something that I think a lot of people could foresee. They were like, no, man, there's this really horrible market, financial condition that's coming to the banking system and it's going to collapse banks all over the place. And then all of a sudden, here it is, this tool to fix it. So what I guess I'm getting at is that if we can communicate the problem, then most likely the Federal Reserve has recognized the problem as well. And they probably have some sort of backup scenario to deal with that problem. And so when the problem is almost addressed as a problem and not a solution, but it is a solution to their problem, then it really comes down to whose problem really is it. Another person's problem may be another one's solutions. All right, one person, you see what I'm getting at? And so as we were facing the problems of inflation expectations and supply chain breakdowns and, big time issues with that and the money printers going off and everybody's pointing at it saying, oh man, look what the Federal Reserve is doing. They're screwing up. They don't know what they're doing and all this other stuff. And it's causing this huge inflationary expectations and inflationary scenario. And everybody sees it and everybody recognizes it and everybody thinks that their whole world is going to come to an end in an inflationary nightmare. And the Federal Reserve, meanwhile, is gaining and attracting ever increasing amounts of their ammunition, right, during this whole time. All of a sudden, we find inflation is just disappearing, is going, right? It's dropping all the way back down to they're almost to their goal, right? Getting there, almost to their goal, but didn't quite achieve it. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how much money did they really pull out of the system? Yeah? Like, I mean, they just went and printed trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that was going to burn everybody's life away. But yet here all of a sudden we got inflation dropping all the way down to under 3%. It's at 2.7. People are arguing about, oh man, they can't quite achieve their goal. And I'm thinking they were going for moderately above 2%. That is their goal. Like that is their goal. This is what they were goaling for, right? This is like that. This is their, like, if they had inflation expectation at 2%, which I believe they do, if they got inflation to 2%, which I think they're going to get to at some point in the future, even if we have these tariffs and, eventually it'll come down to a 2% actual mark on the indicators of everything that they see out there as far as whatever that is that they use, because we all know that their inflationary numbers are completely made up anyway. But that would be their Goldilocks moment, is to have inflation expectation at 2%, actual inflation at 2%, and have the Fed funds rate at neutral. And if they had that all in one shot at one line, that would be their like, just yeah moment, right? That would be it. Now, whether or not they can achieve such a thing is beyond me, right? Because they have never once ever achieved a 2% target, ever. That's why I find it to be comical when people say they're going for a 2% target. They're not, because they've never been able to do it in the past. So I don't know why people would think they would be able to do it into the future. That's like not a concept for the Federal Reserve. Now they do go for a 2% average inflation rate over time, which they've communicated many times. And this is, again, part of the credible threat theory that I have shared many times, showing how they have talked about it, not only through their statements on long run projections, their monetary policy strategies, but there was a great speech that came out August 27th of 2020, Jerome Powell, talking about the changes to monetary policy, and he straight up says it right in there. We have changed our monetary policy, now going for a 2% average inflation rate over time, and we have no mathematical formula for figuring this out. And that's what I found to be the most funniest thing in the entire globe, is that nobody caught this, right? Nobody caught this particular thing. Now, there was a congressman who somewhat addressed it at one point. What was it, a year ago or whatever it was? We did a video on that covering it, and he came really close. Like, it was so close to really clarifying this whole 2% average inflation rate over time thing. But yet it was dropped, or basically not necessarily dropped, but it was brought to, like, it was almost like the conversation was almost like shifted away from it, with the idea that, yes, this is what we are doing, and we are going to review that strategy at the end of the year. And then that was it. It was dropped. Like, that was like kind of the communication about it. And so when I'm thinking, it was just like, okay, Congress was this close, right, to like clarifying this and making it addressed to the people out there that says, hey, you are not going for a 2% target, but going for 2% average. And then it was, right, gone. And I'm like, dang, it was like right there. So if you heard it, if you listen carefully, you could hear it, you could see it, you could hear it in their statements as they were saying it. But if you weren't privy already to the idea of it, you probably missed it, because it was somewhat swept out of the way. I wish I had a video of it right now to share with you. But anyway, let's move on here. Let's get some questions going or something. Hey, Simon. Hello, everyone. Hey, Grand Roofing Incorporated. All right. Argentina reduced inflation from 25 to 5% in 7 months. Busted. Listening while welding. All right. Got to pilot my truck to get my son. I'll be listening mode for a while. Well, thank you for being here, all-nighter. Let's cruise up here. Bisilver platinum and crystallized osmium. I don't even know what that is. Oil damn sure did not come from fossils. All right. We need a gold machine. All right. Oh, thanks for posting the email account, man. All right. Mess with the stream, sir. Ask your questions. He wants chats. Yeah, I mean, we got 76 people up in here. If we can get it to 100, well, I mean, if I said if we could get it to 100 in the next 5 minutes, but otherwise we would end it at. But I'll give you 2 minutes. If you guys can do it in 2 minutes, get it up to 100 likes. That would be like less than 25 likes. So go hit that like button in the next 2 minutes here, and we'll continue the live stream. Otherwise, we'll just end it here at the half hour. Sorry, I just saw it on your page description. Please continue. Disha says hit the like button. All right, there's 79 likes. Keep going, guys. And I'll keep breaking it down, man. I'll keep breaking down how this credible threat theory truly works, and how it is that you can use it in your own theories and own understandings of what it is that you need to do for yourself and your business and your investments and everything else that you got going on out there. Because this stuff isn't easy, and if you're following people who are saying that they screwed up, then you have to take on the theory that they screwed up and then position yourself for them to have screwed up. But if they continue to operate, did they really screw up? And then if you look at the information in a way that says, hey man, they talked about doing some of these things and deploying some of these particular strategies into the future, and they talked about them literally decades ago. And then you can see how it is that these things were developed and used and evolved over time. And once you have grasped that and you see it clearly, and not even clearly, because nothing is ever really clearly, but you see it in a clear fashion outside of them screwing up, right? Because I've taken on the theory that they screwed up. The whole idea of a central banking system in nature is screwed up. It's like a screwed up idea to begin with, right? And so if we take on this screwed up idea to begin with, then we have to also take on that idea that it's a failure, it's not going to work, it's not going to be able to function any further, there's going to be all kinds of chaos and mayhem from it, okay? And there's ways of looking at it in which that would be true. All right, you guys got 3 seconds to go hit more like buttons. And so there's ways of looking at it in that fashion. And so that says, hey man, the central banking system is absolutely destroying this whole system. And you can use it in that fashion. But to me, I look at it and I say, okay, the central banking system has created a situation in which that this economy is now separated in such a dramatic fashion that it makes it almost impossible for those who are working class individuals to work their way into a position in which that their their efforts are going to have like a reasonable exchange for what would be considered that of the American dream. Like that's where I see. Thank you guys. You got it up to 103 likes right now. I really appreciate those all those like buttons. But that's really where I see like the central banking system having conditioned this economy to be. Because there was a time in our lives, right, as the central banking system was growing, it created a situation that we were like really prosperous, right? We were producing the world's greatest stuff. We were sending it out there to the world. We had that world sending us their money. We had availability of a central banking system that could create money that was allowing for all the transactions in the world to take place. And we were really enjoying that position. Right? But as this thing continued to grow and the separation, the wedge was being driven from the new deployment of money, because that's really where the problem comes in. It doesn't have to come down. I mean, the policies and government styles and societies and all kinds. Okay, all that stuff, that all has a reasonable impact on the economy. But really, what it comes down to separating the rich from the poor is new money and how that new money comes into the system. Right? And so, the more new money that comes into the system, the more separation between the rich and the poor that you're going to find from that. And so if you are sitting in a situation in which that you have a central banking system that is constantly deploying new money or has the ability to constantly deploy new money in a way that is totally being accepted by the globe as they continue to write debts that are due inside of that new money, then you're going to have a position in which that the economy is going to continue to separate the rich from the poor. And this is why we have such massive inequality that is now taking place. And if there is something to do about it, I'm not sure exactly what it is, because in my mind, the only way to really deal with that is very socialistic, communistic, tyrannical efforts that are going to prevent people from moving into luxurious experiences from all their hard work, which doesn't sound very fun. All right. Like you want to work and then enjoy your hard work. And that's human nature. And the unfortunate thing about that is that the harder you work and the more that you are industrious and prosperous and savor, the more you want to enjoy that hard work from all the savings and sacrifice that you have given. And the moment that you start to really enjoy that move into that luxurious experience from all that hard work is really where the separation starts to begin. And now I know a lot of people are like, well, what are we to do about this? This isn't fair. This isn't, right. And how come, it has to be this way? It's not, it's just the way it is. It's like an economic force. Once you understand how these economic forces work, then it's like you understand why it's taken place. It's not a matter of being frustrated or mad or, I mean, I guess you could be all that kind of stuff. I mean, whatever. But the meaning that I've been given behind it as far as what I need to do about it is I need to figure out what I need to do beyond that of my regular 9 to 5 job, because that job isn't going to do it anymore. I don't care who I vote for. It doesn't matter who you vote for at this point, right? Unless you're like voting into something that is going to change the way that we conduct ourselves as a government in general. Right. And like I said, start deploying communistic tyrannical efforts to keep people from moving into the luxurious experience and maintain a lower standard of living so that our production can maintain value. I don't think that's going to happen. Like that. I mean, I don't like the American people would be very upset with that whole notion or idea behind it. And I don't think you can get a political leader to do that. So knowing that's not going to be the case and not even really wanting that, like not even really wanting it, I don't want that, right? Just saying that it doesn't matter what I want, I have to work inside of the idea of what it is that's taking place right now. I can't change it. I don't expect it to change. I expect for me to adapt to the ability to deal with whatever it is that's changing out there in the environment. And so this is really where like understanding these economic theories from the past can really help you to understand what it is that's taking place not only now, but what can happen going into the future. And you don't really stress about like what it is that these other people are doing, even though they have a huge impact on our lives. There's some things that they're just not going to be able to control. Or if they attempt to do it, they're going to see, backlashes from the underlying economic forces that are at play, which you begin to recognize that are happening out there. And again, like, I try to break these things down many times for people, but it's the four economic theories that I like to follow the most is Gresham's law, Triffin's dilemma, the bullwhip effect, and Cantillon's effect, right? Cantillon effect is probably the biggest one because I refer back to his essay so many times. It was one of the first essays that was written on economic theory, and it was like literally centuries ago. And some of these underlying economic forces, when you start reading through this essay, you can see them. You can see the essay. You can see within the essay. You can recognize these economic forces, even though they've changed. Considering that we don't have horses and wagons anymore, but we got cell phones and airplanes. There's a difference in the way that these economic forces are now impacting the economy. But to understand that these economic forces are still prevalent within the economy, they've just they've adapted and evolved over time as well. And so things like good money being chased out by bad money. This is one of the reasons why I find it so comical when it comes to the theories behind the BRICS nations rising and knocking the dollar off its pedestal. Is that I find this very comical into understanding that Gresham's law will not allow a bad currency to compete against a good currency. Okay, I'm sorry, a good currency to compete against a bad currency. And so when you think about like the BRICS nations developing like a gold-backed currency or something of that nature, and here you have this bad currency out there that is got confidence, people are using it. It's like, it's supposed to compete against it, right? So if it's competing against it, it means that people are still using it. So if people are using it and then they see there's a pile of gold sitting over there that these people are using, they'd be like, hey, man, let me, and they would take that, right? Because the most industrious people would then go and deploy their efforts to acquire the gold-backed currency and then hoard it for themselves and continue to deploy the bad currency that is out there, right? This is like the way that it's going to go down. And so to understand, like, this is even like how the dollar was able to take over gold was the fact that people didn't look at the dollar differently than they did gold. Like they thought, okay, if I have a certain amount of dollars, I can get a fixed amount of gold. And they truly believed that. And that was the case. Like you could do that. And so as people continued to believe that and operated in this fashion, that if they were operating in dollars, they were operating in gold, what they were thinking in their mind is that these two shared a symbiotic relationship. They were the same thing. And that's how dollars were able to replace gold. Now, to say if dollars were to come in and say, hey, man, we're going to compete against gold, nobody would even, like, whatever. It was like, give me the gold. I don't want your paper. But they had a decision back then to say, hey, man, we don't need to use paper. But since they didn't see it any differently at the time, they didn't have any problems using paper because it was so convenient and efficient. And they wanted to do transactions. And that's the important part to like, to internalize on that stuff, because a lot of times people will take it, no, they force it upon you, and that way you're broke, and they can manipulate and slave wage, slavery, debt slavery, and all this other stuff. And it's just like, okay, well, that's kind of true, right? Because well, not kind of, it is true, right? And there is men out there who have figured out to deploy such efforts within to society in order to take advantage of it, and they are doing a great job of it. Not saying that's a good thing or bad thing. I'm just saying that if that was their goal, they are doing it, right? So I'm not trying to say that isn't happening, but the fact is that we had a choice at the time, not me, not you, because we weren't really alive back then. But we had a choice back in the day as the people to say, no, I'm not accepting Federal Reserve notes. I'm only accepting silver certificates and silver dollars and gold certificates and that sort of currency. But then also at that time, you had to be willing to say, I'm not going to eat in order to maintain this whole idea that I don't want the Federal Reserve notes, because you also have to take into consideration that you may not be able to do business. And if you can't do business, how is it that you're going to eat? Because everybody needs to do business in order to eat. That's the whole idea of doing business, right? Is to acquire food. And so if you're sitting in a situation in which that it's very difficult in order to do transactions because the only thing that everybody has out there is Federal Reserve notes and nothing else, then you're probably going to give in to the Federal Reserve note and do the transaction so you can eat. And right now, we could do that. Like, we don't have to use the Federal Reserve note. We are choosing to do it every single day. Right? And although people out there say, no, we don't have a choice, whatever, we do. We're choosing, right, to live a life of within the system that then gives us easy access to things like easy access to all the things that we have in our life. Like, I mean, to me, I think about how hard it would be to try and transact in silver, and it would be very difficult. Now, I know you could tokenize it and you can do all that other stuff, but even with the idea of tokenizing to make it more efficient to transact in, if that was to be the real system, we don't produce, we consume. And as a consuming nation, we would export all our money. And then we would be all broke and we wouldn't have any money to do any transactions with. So it's like, to me, I look at this and it's just like, it's not a fair, fun, easy, or one that you can actually change. And so it's better to adapt to what it is that's going on. All right. Where's that super chat? Oh, there we go. A to Grub, thank you very much for the $10, man. I just came from South Africa and understanding how the brick is being used there. I think the U.S. is underestimating the brick currency. Africa GDP is exploding under the BRICS currency. Okay, now okay, let's think about this for just a second. What is it that's the BRICS currency? Like, is this I mean, there's BRICS nations out there who are doing transactions in their own sovereign currency, right? These are BRICS nations transactions using their own system. I believe is what you're trying to say. Is there an actual basket of these currencies that has created a BRICS currency, so to speak? Like, can you hold a brick currency? Like, can you hold like a one brick? You know? And I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of brick you're talking about. But that's kind of the question that I have to ask on that. And then on top of that, when you're talking about exploding, are you talking about the amount of transactions that they're doing? Or because that could be very well exploding. Or are you talking about the amount of transactions that are comparatively to what it is that the United States dollar is doing in the global transactions around the world? Because in that case, it's an insignificant amount. It's very small, right? And it is growing, and it is growing dramatically in a lot of ways, especially if you put that kind of meaning behind it, you can see it taking place. The only problem that they're going to end up facing is a couple of things, right? And this is really where I think a lot of the times people don't quite seem to grasp what would happen if one of these nations was an attempt to try and develop a currency that was going to be that of the world reserve currency, right? Because this is a very difficult thing for a lot of times for people to try and get what it is that's taken place in order for it to be replaced, right? Because in order for it to be replaced, there has to be a couple of conditions in which that no BRICS nation is wanting to step into, right? Now, all these BRICS nations, every one of them wants to be producers. And this is important to take into consideration. Being a producer nation is a good, strong economy, right? Producing, saving, produces strong economy. And so all these BRICS nations want to be producer savers, and they're kind of pissed at the dollar and all this other stuff, and they want to exchange amongst each other. Now, the problem with being a producer saver nation and you have a fixed currency is that what you're going to end up doing is you're going to have a situation in which that the most industrious of those countries who are using that fixed currency amongst each other, The most industrious one is going to hoard it all for themselves, because that's how it works. That's how Cantillon effect works. And to not take that into consideration, that this would happen, is it's very naive to the whole idea of how economic forces work, right? And so to understand that you can't really develop a gold currency that's going to be used inside of this, I don't care if you put it in a digital form and tokenize it or anything else. If you have an industrious people out there who are doing quite well at being a saver, they're going to save in that. And what they are saving is your transactable currency. They're saving the money. And so this is a problem that these BRICS nations will end up facing if this is the condition in which that they are trying to move into. Now, when it comes to the United States and what it is that they have done, is they have deployed the ability for people to use as much currency as they want to do all the transactions they could ever possibly imagine. Now, if a BRICS nation wants to deploy a currency that can do that, then they have to do what the United States is doing. And what the United States is doing is something that these BRICS nations don't want to do. And that is that they have to be the consuming nation. See, if you consume stuff, you export money. Quite opposite of a producer-saver nation who exports stuff and consumes money, right? So we export money, consume stuff. Quite opposite of what a producer-saver nation would want to do. So if these nations out there, these BRICS nations, want to produce a currency out there that is going to facilitate all the transactions that are going to be demanded out there in order for everybody to prosper and eat and do all the things that they want to do, the unlimited amount of transactions that they want to do, then they have to be able to deploy that currency out there into the system. And this is Triffin's dilemma, right? This is where the United States is doing what no other nation can really do. And now, to be able to do that, the Federal Reserve has to step in with the ability. Yeah, what's up, bud?
Dog pooped on the carpet.
Oh, good deal. Okay, give me just a minute. I'll end this and I'll go in. Great. He wasn't paying attention. I told him. Anyway. Dog ownership. Okay. So I already forgot where I was at with this. So, man, now my concentration is just completely broken. Here, where was I at on that, guys? Little man is growing up. Yeah, he is. It has nothing to do with capitalism I'm talking about. No, he wasn't feeling well today, so he stayed home, and I stayed home with him. The boss has arrived. Oh, that's right. Okay, so what is it that the Federal Reserve really needed to do, in with conjunction with the United States government? Because this is really where I think a lot of times people start correlating these two together to say they work in conjunction, and in a lot of ways they do. Because the demand for having currency of a world, the demand for currency on a world reserve basis here, right? So all the doing all the transactions around the globe, all these nations out there wanting to do transactions, getting that money out there, right, through the debt issuance that has taken place from the United States government. So the government deploys a lot of debt, right? They put out there the bonds. Those bonds is the debt issuance coming from the government. This is like a loan, right? Those go out there to the world as a safe and liquid asset. And this is really where I think a lot of people get confused on where it is that people own this stuff and how they own the United States. Not only do they own the United States in that fashion, but they also own something that they are using in place of gold. Right? And so this is, again, like, I think is very difficult for a lot of people to understand as they look at the United States as a bad nation, not going to pay its debt back, so, whatever, going to fail. But yet the entire globe is using that U.S. Treasury debt in place of gold that they had used at one time as a world reserve currency, right? So gold was the world reserve currency. They replaced that with U.S. Treasuries. And so, again, like, this is where I think, like, the BRICS nations would have a very difficult task in being able to replace that. Like, they got to take out enough debt to replace all the U.S. Treasury debt to facilitate all the liquid assets, right? The safe and liquid asset that people are using as a world reserve currency. Or you have to start lowering the amount of transactions that people are going to do. This is depressionary, recessionary effects. So if you're not going to use something that is plentiful, like the U.S. Treasury debt, then you have to have somebody else who is providing something just as credible, just as confident, and just as, safe and liquid as those U.S. Treasuries are. And I don't see that coming from any of the BRICS nations. All right, guys, I got to go clean up dog mess. Uneducated economist, you guys let me know.